Hello everyone, and thank you for coming back to yet another episode of The Gloving Paradigm. I am your host, Peter, aka LPD Buke, and I really hope you guys are ready for this one because I'm going to be continuing on with the Archetypes of Gloving into the new advanced portion of the series, which will be Archetypes of Gloving 201, and it's going to be covering all the gloving styles that we have out there, and hopefully as new ones come around, I can actually cover those as well. But to start things off in this series, I asked you guys which one I should cover first between impacting and conjuring, and you guys chose impacting. So, to start this all off, we're going to be covering impacting. Now, I can certainly tell you from my own experience, I love impact shows. Literally, the first YouTube video I watched was Skittles at Beyond Wonderland 2010. Which was an impact show essentially, and I've always enjoyed them. There's something about impact shows that are just so distinct from any other gloving style out there that I really think people really need to understand why this is such an iconic style in the gloving community and why we actually need to pay a good amount of attention to it and what we can actually learn from it. Okay, so to start things off, I need to cover a couple of things before we really get into the nitty-gritty about impacting, and that is, well, a lot of people tend to think that impacting is just conjuring when it's not necessarily true. Yes, if you think as conjuring as an umbrella term, which I tend to do, because if you think about the term of conjuring just being the essence of manual light manipulation, then yeah, impacting is technically conjuring. But the one thing people need to understand when it comes to impacting is that the dynamics of impacting are so far apart from the rest of what conjuring can do that it makes itself that distinct. Okay, so yes, conjuring as an umbrella term, it does facilitate that in impacting. You know, impacting, conjuring, phasing are pretty much all the things that can fall under the umbrella term of conjuring. However, I will tell you that teleporting does not count under conjuring because to me conjuring in the umbrella term is any form of manual light manipulation. Now what I mean by manual is that you're physically changing the lights on your own, not in an automatic sense. As apart from teleporting, they're actually utilizing a feature in the light to do it for them. So they're not manually manipulating the light, they're actually manipulating the features within the light to create their effect. So I definitely want to get that out of the way. Okay, so to all my conjurers out there, don't worry, your style will also be covered on the show as well. It's just between the two, I wanted to see which one wanted to be covered first, and you guys voted, and unfortunately, impacting really took that in a landslide. Like, holy crap, I didn't realize how many people actually really wanted to understand impacting. But that's great. That's fantastic. Because impacting is one of those awesome styles that everyone should at least try out and just have some fun with it, because to me, impact shows have always been just pure fun to me. There's no strict thing or ethos that you have to follow when it comes to it, but there is a level of something you do have to abide to in order for it to really feel like an impact show. But to a lot of people who tend to think that impact shows aren't really that much fun, I can certainly tell you that they are. They're really fun. I know a lot of people who like doing impact shows, and I just thoroughly enjoy watching impact shows. It's just the best way I can put it. An impact show is just like a breath of fresh air to me when it comes to shows, okay? Because as much as I consume unhealthy amounts of content in various places, light shows are another thing that I pretty much consume on an unhealthy amount, as my partner would probably tell you. but yeah, to me, anytime I see an impact show up, I just feel like I get a breath of fresh air. It's, it pulls itself so far away from the other styles that that's how it is for me. So, but now let's get into the nitty gritty of impacting, shall we? So the one thing that I know a lot of people want is the explanation of what impacting is. And it's pretty interesting to try to describe it because it's, I don't know, in a way it's kind of like talking about morphing in a way, where some people just say it's really hard to describe and you kind of have to watch it. And so when it comes to impacting though, it is a style of gloving that is highlighted by its utilization of two contrasting colors, which is typically red and blue, which I'll get into the reason why in a little bit, to help magnify the techniques in gloving and create a lasting impact on the viewer. Hence the term impacting. Okay, so the main focus of impacting is utilizing the thumbs as your main dynamic feature, with the precision being paramount in terms of disrupting the depth perception of your viewers as well as drawing them in. Okay, so that's something you definitely need to understand when it comes to impacting. The biggest feature that people tend to not think about is the contrast between the colors that you're using in your thumbs. Okay, and the reason why it's so typical to see red and blue is for a multitude of reasons. One, they're very contrasting colors in terms of light. Not only that, if you actually understand how light works in terms of wavelengths, red is the longest wavelength in terms of the color spectrums, as blue is more of the shortest wavelength. If you guys understand why the sky is blue, blue is the shortest wavelength, so it gets increased 10 times more, hence why the sky looks blue. Okay, so that's one of the main reasons why red and blue are so prominent in impacting, is because the contrast between them as colors as well as their wavelengths. Okay, now I know a lot of people are going to say, well, that doesn't really matter, but I tend to disagree because it's it's science. Okay, when you actually apply science to an art like this, it actually really helps magnify the performance overall, at least in my opinion. I know a lot of people might disagree with me. It's and not thinking about using science to help with their performances, but I do think that understanding the science behind lights and things like that will actually help you further your performance. Okay, so you have those. Okay, those are pretty much the definitions I can give you, and a lot of people will tell you that some lights work better than others. There are many different variations of these types of lights out there now, which anyone probably will call them impact lights, but there's a good decent list that you can choose from if you're actually interested in getting into impacting. So to start with the lights, we have the classic iNova emissives, which if you don't know what those are pretty much what the traditional ones are used for, and I'll explain why. Then of course you have the eNovas that Amazing Lights produced, which I know that my younger brother has a pair of those and he's thoroughly enjoyed those every time he wants to dabble in impacting. I thoroughly enjoyed those. I wish there was more brightness to them in a way, and I will certainly say when it came to the multiple colors that you can put into it, I thought that was a great push in the right direction. However, I did feel like when you add like 3 colors to your the eNovas and try to do a show that way, I kind of felt like it detracted from it, because when it comes to impacting shows using a solid color like red or blue, and you get that classic impact brightness in your face just being a solid color, that really kind of sells it for me. And what the eNova did, if you did like full 3 colors, it was okay, but I just felt like it didn't really pull or actually have that oomph that traditional impact shows have with those types of lights. Now, my favorite thing about the eNovas though is when you're actually on the blink setting and you actually get the 3 colors blinking like that. Oh, I love that. I think that's probably one of the best pushes in the right direction for me when it comes to the blink, at least. Again, I'm pretty much kind of digressing on that. So, of course, LEDgloves.com also has what they call the supernovas. I believe those are actually bulb chips, but don't worry about that because most novas are going to be used as bulb chips as it is, and having that clear solid color is just really what sells the show for me. So you have that. Of course, there's the OSMs that have an iNova mode, and of course the Spectras have an iNova mode. I think some people were kind of confused on that. I'm not entirely sure, and I couldn't really find the information to confirm nor deny that. So if you guys could confirm or deny that, that'd be great so I can have the proper information for everybody. And of course there's the Azotecs. I have no idea where to get those. I tried finding where they are and I couldn't really find them. But those are out there, and there are the 2 specific ones that people always try to tell people to go for, and that's the supernovas or the emissives. Now, I'll explain here in a little bit why that is, because there's a certain feature in these 2 specific ones that a lot of impactors sought after, and that's what they want. So to understand a very simple, well, not really, it's simple on paper. It's not really simple in practice, but it is simple on paper when you write it out. But when it comes to the techniques in impacting, the first thing you do need to analyze is the lights. Okay. Now, of course, everybody should know when it comes to an impact show, the thumbs are going to be your main feature. Okay. And if you think about it, when it comes to conjuring as an umbrella term and impacting came first. And it makes sense in a historical and evolutionary sense, because when it comes to something being brand new and people experimenting with, they're going to try something very simple. So if you think conjuring came first, kind of did, but not really. It came in the form of impacting, because just doing your thumbs was a very, very simple form of contouring. You only need to focus on those 2 lights. Then as time went on, people started experimenting more with trying like 4 lights. That's why you get certain impact shows that actually you see them changing their middle fingers to become a blink, and it actually matches up with their lights on the thumbs and things like that. Then eventually just kind of grew from there, from 6 to 8 to the full set, and that's where we actually have conjuring now, is using all the lights. Okay, now when it comes to impacting though, it's very simple on paper, and then of course, you know, the evolutionary part going into conjuring. But I can certainly tell you, with my dabbling in impacting, has been it's been very trying every time I tried it, because there's just so much things that you have to take into consideration, and there's just so many things you need to keep yourself aware of that it could feel daunting, but that should not deter you from actually trying out this style. Okay, but back to the lights. You know, thumbs being contrasting colors, red and blue is your typical one. You know, when it comes to using other colors besides red and blue, it's been actually really hard, because again, those colors can bring such a strong impact on the show, hence the term, that it's really hard for people to actually try to branch out. Now, I've seen people use orange and green, which is a good step in the right direction, but I still don't feel like you get that same level. Now, you could probably do green and purple, and it might work. I don't know. You can try it. I know when it comes to just the eye novas, like the bulb chip ones, especially if you're using like the traditional novas and you're using a clear purple bulb, when you go to your dops mode, you're going to have that little red line going through your dops. So that might detract from the show itself. Again, you can try it. I would probably not try it, but again, that's where experimentation comes in, and I will never tell any of my viewers or listeners to not experiment or try things out. You know, that again, how can you know if something works if you never even attempted to try it? You know, that's how I look at it. So, but contrasting colors is the key when it comes to impacting, at least for me. To my eyes, the contrast is what really sets it apart from any other show, okay? Because that's what they're focusing on. They're focusing on showing you the contrast between the 2 colors. That way your eyes can actually focus on one color, and then the other color being such a high contrast to that color, it's going to draw your attention to that one, which that's the effect that you want to have when it comes to your impact shows. You want your thumb lights to actually, as you're doing your sequences, actually like draw the attention of your viewers' eyes to whatever light that you want to draw their attention to. So like, for example, I'm using the red light, and my viewers seeing the red light, and then they see the blue light, that's going to draw their eyes to that, and that's what you want to have. You want those colors to grab your viewer's eye and say, hey, focus over here now, because this is what's going to happen. Okay, so that's one of the big things that people need to understand when it comes to impacting. Okay, now it is a very simplistic setup when it comes to your fingers. Okay, now traditionally it has always been, and I've always enjoyed doing it this way. Now I'll give you guys a couple of tips that you kind of spice this part up, but traditionally what a lot of impactors like doing, especially when I was first getting into gloving, is that they will have their index, ring, and pinky be in RGB mode, which is, you know, the traditional E-Raven mode, and oftentimes they'll either have the middle finger be that, or they'll have it yellow, and it's usually another set of eye novas on the middle fingers. That way it kind of breaks up that kind of, I don't want to say monochromatic because there's multiple colors, but that stagnation of just being a single set. You know, it kind of breaks that up, and it works. It works really, really well. And again, yellow being contrasting towards red and blue is another good example. You know, they're granted they're the primary color, but they are very contrasting to each other, that you know your eyes are going to be able to spot them out throughout all the colors, right? So with that being said, you also have the ability to use palm lights. Now, not everybody uses palm lights, especially when it comes to impacting. However, I will certainly tell you that I've always enjoyed palm lights in impact shows, especially if your lights are set up in a way where if you're using your thumb lights and you're pointing it into your palm, I like it when it actually washes out the palm light, so you actually can focus on the whole spotlight that the Nova is doing on your palm. And the other thing I also like when it comes to palm lights is that if you're using palm lights, you try to get the blinks to match the colors that you're using on your thumbs. I don't know why, but it's much more pleasing to me to see that. Now, I know certain people like using whites for their palm lights, which is fine. My only issue is if you're doing the whole pointing the light into your palm thing to get the whole spotlight effect, that white really kind of detracts it for me. It kind of breaks that hold that it has, that attention grabber thing. So that's how I feel about it. I know a lot of people might disagree, and I'm totally okay with that, but that's how I just feel about it. All right. Now, here's one thing I definitely want to explain to everybody is that when it comes to at least the novas and impacting, not trying to say the literary trope, but there is a rule of 3. Okay, and it's super important to understand this rule of 3 when it comes to impacting, because it's literally what dictates how you're going to operate with your lights. All right. So first things first is the Nova program, which is the lights features that it has. So you have, now a lot of people will tell you it's either, solid, strobing, or whatever. The term that I've used since the eNova exists is, I like to say ribbon, dots, and blink. Okay, not blinky. There's a major difference between blinky and blink. And blink is just that traditional iNova slow, steady blink, as blinky is its own separate thing. Okay, so please do not get those mixed up. I'm not saying that blinky is on iNova, it is just simple blink. Okay, those are your 3 modes that you have on iNova. Okay, it always starts on the high beam, which is your solid or ribbon. Then you have your low beam, which is your dots, and then you have blink. Okay, now understanding these modes is what's going to help you facilitate and magnify your performance as an impactor altogether. Now, there's another thing that people need to understand is that there is a 3-second rule. Okay, and the 3-second rule is this: when you turn on the iNova, let's just say it's in off position, you turn it to the to the solid. If you count 3 seconds and then push the button again, it's going to turn off. But if you push that button within that 3 seconds, it's going to go to the next mode. Now this is why I keep telling people you need to understand and really get a grasp of what your lights are capable of doing. Because if you do, this is the type of style that comes from that. Okay, we can actually utilize that understanding of our lights to magnify our performance in a much bigger sense. Okay, and this is why I love impacting so much, because they take to heart understanding your light chips, and this is the reason why. Okay, so you have the 3-second rule in terms of changing between positions, but there's another thing that I definitely want to explain. There's a 3-second hold rule. Now, when it comes to specific ones like the traditional emissive iNovas, or the supernovas, when you're on a mode and you push the button down within the 3 seconds before it just turns off, it's going to turn off as you're holding the button. Now, if you hold that button longer than 3 seconds, it's just going to restart back to where it was. Like, let's say you turn it on to high and then you hold it for more than 3 seconds, it's going to be back on high. That's just how it works. But if you hold it within the 3 seconds and let go, it's going to shift into the next mode. So let's say I turn it on and within the first 3 seconds I push down on the button, it's going to look like I turned it off, but as soon as I let go within that 3 seconds, it's going to go to the second mode of dots. This is extremely important when it comes to a really good impacting show, because it allows you to actually have this timing sequence between your 2 thumbs that you can do really, really cool effects. Now, if you guys haven't seen any of his shows, I highly, highly recommend watching it. But TNT Fry, or PM Fry, everybody should understand who Fry is. He's one of the biggest well-known impactors out there. There's a couple of shows that he actually have his thumbs pushed into his palms, and both of the lights are turned off. And he'll turn one on, and then his sequence is pretty much pushing down on that light that's turned on to turn it off, and turning on the other one, and kind of bouncing between the modes that way. And once he actually gets to the blink mode, he'll actually have both of them on and kind of like do this little liquid jellyfish pull apart thing. Okay, that's one of the things that I love about impacting shows, is when you actually manipulate your lights to their fullest capabilities, you're able to create these effects that are just absolutely jaw-dropping. Like that, for example, that's one of those big jaw-dropping things for me. Okay, so that's one of the things that people definitely need to understand when it comes to impacting. Like the emissives are like the godsend for impacting. At least in my opinion, they're the godsends, because you're able to pull off features like that to actually really magnify your shows. So if you really want to get to the full advanced level of impacting, strive to get your hands on some emissives. Now, I will certainly tell you, they are not going to be cheap. They're going to be rather expensive, but you're not buying a whole set of 10, you're only buying 2. Okay, now the maximum extent I would probably tell people is to buy 4, so you can do the little middle finger thing, which is always great in an impact show in my opinion, because it really helps bring more contrast. So definitely if you're really interested in getting into impacting, impacting, going with the supernovas or the E-novas if they still actually make them, or the Aztecs, those are perfectly fine to help you get yourself into the water to try it out. But if you're one of those people who really, really enjoy impacting, really, really want to push it to the next level, emissives is what you want. All right. So definitely wanted to give you guys that kind of heads up with understanding and manipulating your light to their full extent is going to massively have an impact on your show altogether. And that's what I love about impacting, is that they took to heart the understanding and the inner workings of their light to actually utilize it to their biggest abilities. All right. So moving on, we're going to go into understanding the dynamics of impacting. Okay. So showcasing the contrast is huge, is what really puts it on its own separate plane. And I can't really even think that Conjuring does this to this extent. I know some of them try, but impacting just is main feature is that contrast, and that's what really sells the show, in my opinion at least. One thing that people need to understand is when it comes to impacting shows, your thumbs need to act as the focal point of the show. Okay, that's why when you see people doing impacting shows, they'll do like their finger rolls where it's kind of like, I call these cage rolls because that's what it looks like, where they kind of have their fingers somewhat curled and they're rolling their thumbs between their fingers and having that light peek through each finger gap, right? That's how it's still the focal point. Your eyes are still drawn to the thumb light, even if it's in the cage and stuff, because that's what the show is all about. That's your focal point. That's the dynamic that you're trying to convey, is that as long as you're making sure that the focal point is your thumb of whatever color that you're using, then you're doing it right. Okay, because if you're doing things that is not drawing the attention to the light that impacting is so well known for, then you're not really doing impacting, because you're not making that the focal point. And that's one of the big things about impacting, is that the thumbs are the focal points. That's the main feature. Okay, now I understand that nobody really helped me give me any answers when I asked the question, so you guys really put my research and studying skills to the absolute test. But there was a couple of people that say that you don't really need to learn the fundamentals in order to do impacting, which I will certainly say I disagree with that, because if you think about it in a dance form, you have contemporary, you have ballroom, you have hip hop and all this stuff. They have these staple moves that to a lot of people in the community, that if you're not doing these specific moves the right way, then you're not really doing the show right. It's not like, you can say that I'm doing ballet, but then I'm doing, pop locking. That does, ballet doesn't do that. Ballet has its set of rules. Every dance form has a set of rules to help solidify that art form, that style. And so to the people who say that you don't have to have the fundamentals of impacting in order to do an impact show, I disagree, because those fundamentals of impacting is what solidifies impacting as its own style. Now, I will certainly agree with the people that are saying that, they should create their own style with it, which I do agree. Here's the thing when it comes to the fundamentals of any style. When you use the fundamentals that help solidify that, you're able to take that as a building block. Fundamentals are literally kind of like blank slates when it comes to developing a style, especially if it's your own, okay? Those are your foundation building blocks that you need to understand and master, and then you can adapt your own style on top of that and create your own style through impacting, okay? So that's one major thing I need you guys to understand, that the fundamentals of impacting is absolutely paramount in order to be sold as an impacting show. So definitely keep that in mind. Now, one major thing that people do need to understand is that they need to master sequencing when it comes to impacting. Okay, I've seen plenty of shows where people are literally doing awesome tech and they're able to switch the lights on and off in the middle of their tech to really help, again, keeping that focal point on their lights. It's just, that's beautiful work, okay? And that's them understanding how to sequence things. Now, I had a friend when I really started gloving, who, the best way I can put it, it was like impact conjuring type show. And oh my God, it was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. Okay, so he used classic emissive I-novas in his fingers, but he didn't have anything in his thumbs because his fingers were going to be the focal point, okay? And as he would go through his show, granted his pinkies would stay on dots because I understand pinkies are are like the weakest finger. And, you know, those eye novas back in the day were not the easiest buttons to push. I can certainly tell you from my own experience, because those were my first sets, were the eye novas that I kind of cobbled together through Fry's Electronics type deal, all right? He had his little sequence routine where he would click on 2 lights and they would switch over, and that would be part of his show. And, you know, he'd be doing his thing, and then it would get to a point where he had his sequencing down to the point where he can get all of them into DOPS mode, and then he get them all into blink mode and all this stuff. Like, it was just beautiful work, and this guy just really practiced on his sequencing to get it to this level of a performance, and I thought it was absolutely beautiful. I really wish I actually had that show recorded, because you guys would have been like, holy crap, that's awesome. You know, so when it comes to understanding your sequencing, again, understanding your lights are going to help you sequence better. Okay, you know, you got to understand the 3-second rule. If you wait longer than 3 seconds to change the light, it's just going to turn off. If you do it under 3 seconds, it's going to change to the next mode. Now, if you want to kind of delay the change and you hold it, you can hold it up to 3 seconds. Otherwise, it's just going to reset and go back to the beginning. Okay, so understanding that and getting your sequencing down is going to magnify your performance altogether. And I can certainly tell you, I know I can hear a lot of impactors right now saying, yes, this is exactly what needs to be told. You know, so I'm not saying that you have to keep your sequencing so consistent. You know, you just understanding how to properly like change, like if you want to go from like red to blue and you want to get that seamless change from jumping from one thumb to the other, you got to understand how to time it properly and click properly. Okay, so with that being said, we're gonna go over some pitfalls that I felt like a lot of people were always talking about, and some things that they want to avoid. Again, I've done hours upon hours of researching and reading and scouring through comments and just trying to understand where people stand on certain things. So one major pitfall that people need to avoid is colors that don't contrast. Okay, so like if you use red and orange, they're not really contrasting, and it's just going to look very homogenized in my opinion. So contrast is majorly important. Okay, one other thing that a lot of people always talk about is, I'm going to call it the retina problem. What a lot of people are talking about is when people who just get into impacting, and you can clearly tell that they haven't had a lot of experience with it, you know, that a lot of people say that they just point the lights into their eyeballs too much and they keep them there for too long. Now, I will certainly tell you that when it comes to the solid, you know, the first mode, you don't have to be right in their eye. A lot of people will even tell you that if you point to the center of their bridge of the nose, that's perfectly acceptable, because it's not directly in their eye, but it's close enough to their eye so they still get that big blasting impact thing, you know. And of course, when it comes to the second mode, not a lot. For some reason, a lot of the newer impactors don't typically do this anymore, and I don't understand why, because I love this feature. Is when you get onto the DOPS mode, and again, if you guys actually watch Skittles Beyond Wonderland 2010 video, he has him on the second mode, and he kind of has 2 fingers up, and he's, you know, doing classic whipping, and you actually see the color of his thumb lights on those fingers, and you get that whole strobing effect. I love it when they do that, because it just brings out this whole nother layer in their show of just showing like, hey, look what these lights are capable of doing. And I always like having that little light spotlight like strobe effect that it provides. Like it's just great. So if you're somebody into impacting, definitely try that out. I always love it when I see that, because you get that cool strobing spotlight glow effect. It's just awesome. Okay, but when it comes to pointing the lights into your viewer's face, you don't need to be up that freaking close, and you don't have to point it directly into their retinas, okay? Because a lot of people say that it hurts their eyes after a while, and I can certainly agree, because too much of exposure just it hurts your eyes. So the people who are trying out impacting, try to remember not to point so directly into their eyes, but if you point towards the center of the bridge of their nose, it's perfectly fine, and it doesn't do that much damage, and you still get that kind of effect that impacting has. Okay, so definitely want to kind of cover that little pitfall. And again, improper technique, I can certainly tell you from my experience, is not super easy getting the sequencing down. So that's something you definitely want to practice on. And of course, just a lot of people will tell you that when it comes to impacting, you need to forget everything that you know about gloving, because again, this is a very specific style that just operates on a different playing field than any other style. It even operates on such a different playing field in Conjuring that it's its own archetype. That's why, you know, impacting is very, very far apart from what Conjuring is. because of the dynamic. Okay, and of course there are techniques that you need to understand when it comes to impacting, and again, those are your fundamentals and things like that. Now there are certain things that you can keep in mind, like liquid and whips and stuff like that, but there's a couple other things, like impact shows when it comes to tutting takes on a different role. Okay, and it's supposed to help, you know, distort your viewers perception and really kind of screw around with their depth perception and things like that. But there's a very certain way, and I can't really describe how to go about tech in impact shows, because again, I'm not an impactor, but I highly appreciate the form. You know, it's very difficult to actually get it to pull off. Again, I would say somebody like Fry really actually had a good way of going about doing tech with impacting and really keeping the essence of impacting with the light manipulation, even when he's doing tech. So it's really difficult to explain, and I would definitely recommend watching any of his shows so you can get a good idea what I'm talking about. So again, studying your techniques when it comes to impacting is extremely important. I will certainly say finger lights pulling the focus away from your impacting is going to be a major pitfall. Like, I've seen this once and gladly never saw it again, and I hope I never see it again. But somebody who was starting out in impacting, because that was the first style he decided to go into, he decided to use hyper strobe on all of his fingers. That super pulled away from his thumbs and pulled away from that focal point of his thumbs, because hyperstrobe is just a very bombastic style flashing pattern, and it just screams for attention. You know, that's how I always felt about that type of flashing pattern of hyperstrobe, is that it just screams at you. It wants your attention. It grabs your attention really hard, you know. So don't use hyperstrobe on all your fingers when you're doing impacting. To me, it just pulls away from the focal point, because you want those thumbs to really stick out to your viewer. You don't want to use flashing patterns that's going to pull away from that focal point. All right, so definitely keep that in mind. Now, when it comes to palm lights, I will certainly tell you they're not absolutely necessary. I enjoy them. You don't have to, but I do enjoy them. Typically, people either use white or they have colors that are matching the thumbs. Now, I know that I can't remember which show. It's another Skittles show. I just can't remember the place that he was, the venue, but it's his Heaven and Hell set, and he had palm lights in, and they were red blue flashing. All right, they were pretty much red blue, just hyper strobe kind of deal. I like it when people use those when they're doing the red and blue, because again, when you point it into your palms, it kind of washes out that color, and of course you get that one little tiny blink of the contrasting color, and that always added a nice little twinkle effect to me, and I always enjoyed that. Now, certain people like using white, and that's totally fine. I just kind of like when the palm lights match the colors of the thumb lights. It just works better to me. It just feels better. That's just me. Okay, I just want to put that out there. And you can do impacting with your palm lights. I don't think anyone really understands it. I know some people might say, no, it's the thumbs. You can only impact with the thumbs. However, I will certainly tell you, if you actually watch Gummy's show at 420 Fest, he actually does a small form of impacting with his palm lights, and it can work. It really can work, because, you know, especially if you have them off the majority of the show and then you finally turn them on, that's going to be a huge impact on your viewer, because that was never expected to them. And so having something unexpected like that is going to really facilitate that impact. Hence the term. God, why do I keep doing that? Oh well. So here are my final words of advice. So again, like everybody will tell you, forget everything that you know about gloving when it comes to impacting, because it has its own set of, I know some people would say don't call them rules, they're more like guidelines, but I'm going to call them rules, because if you think about it in the terms of rule of thumb, you get where I'm coming from, right? You know, not trying to be a pun or anything, but I'm just saying, if you think about it in the terms of rule of thumb, that's where it comes in. All right, you know, there's a structure to impacting that makes it impacting, and not following that structure is not going to be impacting. You know, those are the staple foundational moves to create impacting, and that's why you need to follow it. Okay. There is a group on Facebook that you guys can check out, and it's called the Impact Asylum. It has everything and anything that deals with impacting. Unfortunately, I'm not part of that group, so I can't really give you all the details, but there are plenty of people in the Glover's Lounge and other various places that are also members of that group. So if you definitely want to delve in deeper into impacting, I would highly suggest getting yourself into that group and really do not be afraid to ask questions, okay? Ask questions as many times. Somebody will answer. Sometimes people don't. But if you keep not persisting, but persevering in your quest of getting answers, you will find people who will be gladly to help you with that. And of course, Impact Asylum is probably the best place you can go to get any impacting needs. And of course, when it comes to all styles of gloving, and all my listeners have heard me say this time and time again, that blunt force trauma and repetition gets it right every time. When it comes to impacting, I will certainly say it does take a considerable amount of time and patience to get these forms down, to get these techniques down. Just like any other gloving practice that you should be doing, you know, it comes down to that great mantra I always say: blunt force trauma and repetition gets it right every time. You know, you can never always say that the drill sergeant is wrong, but when it comes to this saying, I feel like it's so true. Alright, but that's pretty much all for my episode for this day. I didn't realize it was going to go this long, so hopefully with my editing I can get it down to be much shorter so you guys don't have another whole hour where you guys are hearing me just rambling on. But yeah, that is pretty much the end of my episode. I would like to thank everybody who's been liking the page so far. It is really crazy. Again, I'm going to have my internet stalled in today at the time of this recording. Next Friday, which is, if I remember correctly, is August 2nd, is when I'm going to be having my AMA, because I thought that the end of the month was on a Friday, but it's not. And unfortunately, with my schedule change, I don't want to start an AMA at like 8 o'clock in the morning Pacific time and then have to stop at like 1:30 to go to work. So on my next day off, which will be that Friday, the first Friday of August, is when I'll be having my AMA. So be sure to write down all your questions and give me all your questions already so I can actually have that prepared. There are other various places that you guys can hit me up at if you have any questions that haven't been covered in this episode. First place is, of course, my Facebook page, which is aptly named The Gloving Paradigm. It's not really hard to find. I post pretty much as I can through all the various groups so you guys can have chances to interact with me. You can also hit me up at my email, which is muttonchopguy@gmail.com, and you can also find me on Reddit under the username muttonchopguy as well. And of course, I have my own Discord server that you guys can hop in on. It is going to be linked in this episode's description, so go ahead and click on that link. I once again want to say thank you to everybody who has liked the page, who has been enjoying this show so far. Please do not ever hesitate to give me any feedback of things that you guys want to hear from me, or different ideas that I can go about to make this show much better for everybody. I would certainly hope to hear from you guys soon, but that is pretty much all from me today. So I am your host, Peter, aka LPD8 the Buke, and I'll see you guys all next week.